Another day, another anti-Semitic hate crime against Jews in the United States. This one in Boulder, Colorado. The Houthis continue to fire missiles at the state of Israel almost every other day, and the war intensifies in Gaza. These stories and much more in this week's Jerusalem Minute. Welcome back to Jerusalem Minute here on JNS TV. My name is Josh Hasten, correspondent for JNS News. We are in the JNS Media Hub. I'm here with Alex Traiman, CEO of JNS. Alex, hope you had a good Shavuot holiday.
Josh, I had a wonderful Shavuot holiday, as is a tradition of mine and many others. I walked after dinner from my home to the old city of Jerusalem, which was filled with tens of thousands of Jewish worshipers trying to learn and remember commemorate the reception of the Word of God, the Ten Commandments on Mount Sinai, which took place on that day, the 6th day of Sivan, and it culminated with a trip to the Temple Mount in the morning, where indeed Jews are now permitted to pray. Even with a quorum of 10 men, we were a group of 30 permitted to pray the entirety of the additional Musaf service on the Temple Mount, facilitated by Israeli police, and it was a very intense and meaningful experience.
Yeah, sounds very meaningful. I did my part by eating my share of dairy there at home, celebrating the Shavuot in a quiet, relaxed atmosphere.
Jews eat dairy on Shavuot. We had some cheesecake also at home, and
the best.
All the pasta and cheese, because usually on holidays we just eat meat usually. So this is a change of pace. But it was a good holiday all around.
And now we are after the Chagim, after the holidays, essentially till Rosh Hashanah. And as we were celebrating or getting ready to celebrate the holiday of Shavuot, we had another anti-Semitic hate crime carried out in the United States, this one in Boulder, Colorado. 45-year-old Mohammed Sabri Solomon. He attacked Jews who were actually at a Free the Hostages rally in Colorado, 12 injured, including one in very, very serious condition, a Holocaust survivor. Seriously wounded in this attack carried out by this Egyptian, apparently in the country, in the United States illegally. And he was carrying a makeshift flamethrower and a Molotov cocktails. For those who don't know, the goal here is to burn Jews alive. And that's what this Egyptian national tried to do.
Yeah, we saw the video with a person like on fire on the floor with very severe burns. They said that his flamethrower that he made, it was like one of these garden hoses, you know, where you wear it on the backpack, and then it was filled with gasoline, and it actually caught fire, and his shirt caught fire. That's why they said he took off his shirt. But basically going into a crowd, and the crowd was there to show solidarity with hostages. They're still inside Gaza. And this guy was planning this attack, and again, it's the second attack in just a few weeks. Setting Jews on fire, and that's essentially we're seeing the globalization of the Intifada.
That's exactly what it is. Prime Minister Netanyahu condemning the attack, saying the attacks around the world against Jews are a direct result of blood libels against the Jewish people in the state of Israel. So it all relates to what's going on in Gaza. Hamas creates this false narrative. It is being echoed by the mainstream media. The other day, Israel accused of killing 20 Gazans who were seeking humanitarian aid, which was absolutely false. And then you have these Jew haters around the world who are taking advantage of these blood libels and going out, whether it's Washington or Boulder or anywhere else.
You mentioned the supposed attack, the killing of anywhere from 20 to 30 Palestinians at an aid center in Gaza. CNN, AP, BBC, New York Times all reported the story. Those reports are still online, okay?
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter to them that the central element of the story is not true, that it didn't happen. This did not happen, and it doesn't stop any of these mainstream media from reporting what happened. It was the same thing we saw just 10 days into the war when a Palestinian Islamic Jihad rocket aimed at Israel took a left turn and hit the parking lot of a hospital around midnight, and instead mainstream media says Israel hits hospital in Gaza, kills 500 people. It doesn't matter to the mainstream media that this doesn't happen. That story of Israel killing everybody at the aid distribution center is a story that they want. It doesn't matter if it actually happened, and that sows narratives that then Western governments, the United Nations, the International Criminal Court, the International Court of Justice all rely on these narratives, which was the Hamas strategy to begin with, and also the protests that took place around the world. You know, we saw from the moment after October 7th and almost the moment after Israel went in with the ground operation, there were pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian protests taking place in Western cities all over the world. And they were being done with Palestinian flags, signage, you know, all the stuff that had been printed seemingly in advance for this moment. And that's the whole idea of globalizing the Intifada. And when you incite people to violence, and that is what has happened inside the Palestinian societies, the Palestinian people have been incited to violence against Jews. And that's why you have situations where one day somebody wakes up, takes a kitchen knife and goes to a checkpoint and starts stabbing somebody, or they decide to take their car that they've been driving to work or to the supermarket and all of a sudden ram over people crossing the street or standing at a bus stop. You know, that when you have this kind of incitement, it leads to murder. And because the incitement now has spread beyond the borders of Israel, we are starting to see that individuals are attacking Jews literally on the streets of America. And it's all happening because of the terror incitement on the one hand and on the complicity of the mainstream media to continuously repeat blood libels, essentially, that all of a sudden Israel killed 500 people at a hospital. Israel killed 20 people at a distribution center. Israel's committing a genocide in Gaza, when Israel has gone to greater efforts than any military in the history of warfare to reduce civilian casualties, to move civilians out of harm's way, to the extent that if you took some kind of a census now, we just had this week, we read on Shabbat, the portion of Bamidbar, which is called Numbers in English, and it's the census of the Jewish people. You have to do a counting. There's a good chance that there's just as many, if not more, people alive today in Gaza than there was on October 6th. Okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
And yet, Israel gets accused of genocide. These are all blood libels, and they result in death.
You had ambassador to Israel, U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, calling out the mainstream media for their coverage and their slander and their libel, saying it was reckless and irresponsible, contributing to the anti-Semitic climate that leads to attacks in D.C. and Colorado. Again, this after the IDF said it's absolutely false that Israel killed 20 people. The New York Times, though, doubled down. They read Ambassador Huckabee's response, and instead of retracting or looking into it, they said, no, our report was balanced and fair, even though they're printing a flat lie.
They call it nuanced.
Yeah,
it's nuanced. Yeah, we have a nuance in there, okay? I don't know if it's like a seance or a nuance, like whatever it is, but nuanced reporting, very nuanced, you know, okay, you know, they didn't say that Israel killed 2,000 people at the distribution point. They only said that Israel killed 20. It's very nuanced, right? It's nuanced blood libels.
All a bunch of lies. Yeah. Carolyn Glick, our very own, who was a senior editor here at JNS, is now working for the Netanyahu administration. She actually went on Twitter on the holiday. She's an Orthodox Jew, but in situations of life or death, and that's what this is, when you spread blood libels and people are murdered or there's attempted murder as a result, it's life or death. So Carolyn Glick, there's a whole thread that she posted here on Twitter saying, today is Shavuot, and as an Orthodox Jew, I'm supposed to be offline and in synagogue, but I see a direct connection between the slanders that Hamas is propagating against them and the media is disseminating in the terrorist attacks in Boulder, in Washington, in Paris, and in Israel. I felt it was necessary to get these photos out so the truth, I think, there's a mistake here, so the truth could have a chance to contend with the lies even on the holiday. So you have an Orthodox Jew who's willing to go on Twitter on the holiday, take time and go online in order to expose the hate, the lies, and the propaganda being shared by the mainstream media in hopes that people get the truth, report the truth, and that the incitement against Israel stops. Because as you said, this causes people to be killed, to be murdered over these lies.
Yeah, I had an Israeli official actually send something to me just late last night, and he wrote to me, despite the lies of Hamas and the international media, the people of Gaza voted with their feet and smiles If there were shooting and killing yesterday, there would not be smiles and calm today. And he actually forwarded 7 photos of Gazans smiling at the distribution center, happy to get their aid packages. And we'll show some of these on the screen now.
Let's do that, and also let's turn to the situation with Iran. The U.S. continues to negotiate with Iran, trying to work out some sort of deal to prevent Iran from going nuclear. The news site Axios reported that the U.S. proposal for a nuclear deal presented to Iran this past Saturday allows some limited uranium enrichment within the country, citing several sources. So that was Axios. But then you had President Donald Trump just several hours ago turning to his Truth Social media and saying in big letters, in caps, "We will not allow any enrichment of uranium." So a little bit of a discrepancy rather there between a reported deal, again, not confirmed, but reported deal, and words from the president saying no enrichment to uranium.
Well, who is this deal reported by? Barak Ravid, extreme left-wing Israeli journalist that was being fed information, made his career off of information being fed to him by the Biden administration, worked for Haaretz in Israel, now works for Axios. I think he's also still writing in Israel. I'm not sure which publication. And being fed information. And what this report from Axios does, first of all, it throws all the U.S.-Israel relations into chaos. But like all the other stories meant to throw that relationship into chaos, it relies on anonymous sourcing. And when you go to the direct source, the President of the United States himself puts on his social media in all caps saying, "We will not allow any enrichment of uranium under our potential agreement." Okay, so who are you going to believe? The President of the United States that's stating in very clear terms that cannot be misconstrued for everybody to read, or Barak Ravid from Axios, the one who gets anonymous information meant at harming Israel-U.S. relations?
Who's he getting this from? I mean, if he was very tight with the Biden administration, I mean, is it some ex-Biden staffers who still in the know?
If you look at who's working inside the State Department, for example, right? A lot of times these are career officials, and they don't typically share the same views as the current administration. These are maybe people that were hired during the Obama administration, they're holdovers, and it's hard to fire them. When Trump talks about draining the swamp, per se, that it's not just the politicians or the people at the top. It's these sometimes like mid-level or assistants, or they're running some department in the office, and you have a very difficult time firing them. And so obviously Barak Ravid, who happens to be a very hard worker, he works the circuit, he makes friends with people, and there's a lot of people that are happy to use somebody like Barak Ravid in order to leak their version of the narrative. And Barak Ravid is very happy to be used because it makes him relevant and makes Axios relevant. But I spoke to a very senior Israeli source this weekend who told me that there is no daylight between Israel and the United States when it comes to what the terms of a potential deal would be. And there were reports last week in the Israeli media that the Prime Minister was angry at the chief negotiator for Israel on this issue, Ron Dermer, the Minister of Strategic Affairs, saying that Dermer was allowing for a bad deal to be signed between Israel and Iran, which, by the way, I mean, it's a deal between the United States and Iran. It's not a deal between Israel and Iran.
Right.
But even so, Dermer is in near daily contact with the U.S. administration. He knows what's inside the deal, the terms of the deal that's being presented to Iran. And there's not going to be enrichment of uranium in this deal. I mean, so you're seeing the President of the United States saying this on Truth Social. You're seeing, I've spoken to Israeli officials that are stating that that's not going to happen either. But it doesn't stop Axios and others from projecting what they think could be in the deal. And it's all geared towards making Netanyahu look bad, and then really trying to get Trump to be upset at Israel and Netanyahu.
Alex, when I understand, when all is said and done, at this point, Iran is actually rejecting a proposed deal right now with the United States.
Exactly. Even when Axios reports that there would be the allowance of maybe up to 3% enriched uranium, which is only useful for peaceful nuclear program. Now, Iran doesn't need any peaceful nuclear program. They're saddled with energy. They don't need a nuclear program for civilian uses. Now, obviously, the amount of uranium which they're enriching is, well over 60%, and some people are saying that they're very close to even 90% enriched uranium. But the Iranians even rejecting that deal. So we're seeing that the negotiations are not necessarily going well. Of course, we're relying on media reports, but we did have an Iranian official come out and say that Iran was not going to accept even the Axios deal that was reported. And here, Trump is stating that the deal is not even going to allow any enrichment of uranium. So hard to see how the Iranians could accept that. And I do believe that while the Iranians have a lot of time to play this negotiation out, and that's what they're trying to do, stall for time, make it take as long as possible, ultimately to wait the president of the United States out and hope that, in 3 years' time that there going to be an election and that there's going to be a different president, one that might release the sanctions on Iran, one that might flush the Iranians with cash, one that might be very complicit to allow Iran to develop a nuclear program. President Trump is on a short timeline. Okay, he wants whatever action is going to take place in the Middle East to be completed before he starts going into the midterm elections, which means already come November of this year, you're going to be 1 year away from the midterms. And Trump doesn't want to be dealing with the Middle East. So he wants all this said and done. He wants the war in Gaza finished, and he wants this issue with Iran to come to a conclusion. When you understand that, you recognize, as Trump has said many times, and how Rubio and other members, Witkoff, have stated, the timeline for Iran to sign a deal is not long. And it's very, very possible, if things continue to go the way they're going and Iran continues to reject this last ladder down, to climb down off their nuclear program, that we could very well be on the runway toward some kind of a joint strike between Israel and the United States on Iran's nuclear facilities. Something that could take place even within the next, I would suggest, 100 to 120 days. Now, I've no insider information here. I'm not a prophet. I don't know what's going to happen, but it does feel like we're getting towards the end of a short timeline for Iran to recognize that their nuclear program is finished one way or the other. And if they're not going to allow the United States to dismantle that, without an attack, then you're very likely to see that nuclear infrastructure be dismantled with an attack.
Stay tuned on that story. I want to turn to Gaza now. Unfortunately, we got the terrible news this morning that 3 IDF Givati Brigade soldiers were killed in northern Gaza. Their Hummer ran over a Hamas-placed explosive device. At the same time, from what I understand, it was actually a miracle that more soldiers weren't killed. There were up to 20 explosive devices placed. Only 1 out of those 20 detonated. So on one hand, it's obviously a tragedy, very sad. 3 Givati soldiers were killed. May God avenge their blood. At the same time, we averted a major attack against IDF troops in Gaza. At the same time,
well, I think it indicates, that this war is still raging, that Hamas is not finished, that Hamas still poses a military threat, and that's really the goals of the operation, is to completely dismantle Hamas as a military force and as a political force. They started moving the way aid was distributed, so Hamas will not get their hands on the aid. That it is geared towards making sure that Hamas doesn't have this commodity of the aid, which would now be the last chip that it would have to retain political power. But you see that they are still able to attack. And we were actually reading about what Israel's doing to try to deal with some of these explosives, which is to take old armored personnel carriers, load them with ordnance, drive them by remote control into areas that they think are booby-trapped, and to detonate it there. And we heard, even in Jerusalem late last night, I don't know if you were able to hear from where you're home, but we heard massive explosions. And we're talking about a pretty significant distance between Gaza and Jerusalem. And we heard massive explosions taking place last night, rumblings. And these were taking place in the Gaza Strip. Israel is trying to detonate a lot of this ordnance that is being placed by Hamas. Hamas placed ordnance in many of the buildings. And so we know, and the Prime Minister spoke about this, they take these armored personnel carriers, they drive them into an area they think is booby-trapped, they explode it in the middle of the street, and all of a sudden you see buildings that are destroyed, like on all sides of the street, that they're blowing up in secondary explosions because they are booby-trapped with explosive devices. And that's the reason why when you see the pictures of all these buildings destroyed in Gaza, every one of these buildings, and it's hard for people to understand it, but all these buildings either had weapons depots in them, were booby-trapped with explosives, had entrances to tunnels underground from inside the apartments, from mosques, from hospitals. You know, we just heard again that Israel struck a portion of a hospital in Gaza, which is where Mohammed Sinwar was taken out.
Yeah, he was the de facto head of Hamas there in Gaza. It was confirmed over the weekend that Sinwar was killed. In terms of the sound,
killed at a hospital. Do you understand?
For sure.
This is like,
that's par for the course. That's Hamas.
Right. So meanwhile,
hospital, school, whatever it is.
So meanwhile, the blood libel, you know, that Israel bombs a hospital and kills 500 people, right? That Israel kills 20 people at a distribution point. When Israel is facilitating the delivery of millions of tons of humanitarian aid to Palestinians, when nobody else is doing that, okay? Nobody else is trying to facilitate any aid for Palestinians. Nobody wants to resettle a Palestinian outside a war zone. Only Israel is doing that. Israel's trying to get people out of harm's way. And yet the story is not Hamas uses hospitals to protect its senior leaders. Right?
Yeah, how many mainstream media reported that he was
That is a
killed
war
in the
crime.
hospital?
It's a war crime, okay, to use a hospital as a military base. And nobody says the Palestinians commit war crimes. Nobody says the reason why Palestinians are getting killed in Gaza is because Hamas uses their people as human shields and they use their civilian infrastructure as military bases, right? That's the story, and that's not the story that the mainstream media wants to get out there.
Absolutely. And in terms of the sounds coming out of northern Gaza, we hear it in Gush Etzion, the way Gush Etzion is shaped on the hill. We hear it all day long. We hear the explosions. Sometimes the buildings shake because of the IDF activity there in Gaza. At the same time, over the weekend, we learned that Hamas, once again, rejecting another ceasefire hostage exchange deal. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff confirmed Saturday night Hamas has effectively rejected the latest American ceasefire. I think we would see a 60-day stoppage in the war in exchange for somewhere between, I think it's 9 or 10, half of the hostages and another half of those who were murdered by Hamas. But Hamas, again, it's, you know, par for the course, time after time, rejecting every deal, wanting to hold on to the hostages until the very end.
I mean, this would have been such a terrible deal. Huh?
Yeah, for sure.
You know, to get back 10 of the living hostages, 5 up front, 5 at the end, to release well over 1,000 prisoners, including, I don't remember the exact number, but definitely over 150 Palestinian terrorists with blood on their hands, okay? We're not talking about people that Israel just rounded up. We're talking about people that are in jail because they've been convicted of first-degree murder. And Israel is going to release 150 known murderers, convicted murderers, in addition to several hundred other Palestinian prisoners sitting in Israeli jails, to get back 10 live bodies and 18 dead bodies, and to stop firing in Gaza for 60 days, and to pull back to all the positions that Israel held before the latest military operation, okay? And Hamas rejects it, okay? And yet Hamas had proposed its own deal, which was about half of what the Witkoff deal was, and then they said they accepted the deal, right? And what's the mainstream media headlines? Hamas accepts deal, you know, for ceasefire, right? Hamas has never accepted a deal for a ceasefire, okay? There's a deal on the table. Give us back all of our hostages, living and dead, and leave the strip, and the war is over, okay? But Hamas is not accepting any deal. All right, and it's a whole warped narrative, but I think it's to Israel's benefit, ultimately, that Hamas did not accept this deal, because Israel has to finish the job, and they have to finish it quickly, okay? Part of Hamas's strategy of stalling for time That plays into what I was talking about with the president's window for finishing this off. And while you don't hear the president criticizing Israel for saying that Israel needs to get humanitarian aid in or Israel needs to cease fire, Trump does say over and over again he wants to see this war over as quickly as possible. And he does. He wants Israel to finish the job as quickly as possible. Every time that there is one of these ceasefires, a 2-month ceasefire, that pushes back the window. The longer this war goes on, what that means is the more the Houthis are firing missiles at Israel, because the firing of missiles by the Houthis is directly related to what's going on in the Gaza Strip. Houthis never fired missiles at Israel before Gaza, and if the war will be over in Gaza, that's probably the best way to get the Houthis to stop firing. Okay, all these murders that we're seeing for Free Palestine, in the United States, Washington, D.C. and Boulder, Colorado, these are all based on the fact that this war continues to go on. Israel needs to finish this war as quickly as possible. They need to remove Hamas from power, and they need to get the gates of hell open in Gaza so that those that want to leave, and it's probably several hundred of thousand, can do so. And then some kind of effort can be made to rebuild portions of the Gaza Strip so that all of these blood libels can stop.
You mentioned the Houthis, so let's turn to them now if we can. Firing more ballistic missiles at Israel. There was one that came in just before the Shavuot holiday on Sunday evening. They know exactly when our holidays are. I have no doubt about it. When people are in the shower, people are getting ready for the holiday, they fired. And then last night again, as people are just ending the holidays, you have people in their cars driving home, people getting their houses back in order. They know exactly what our schedule is, and they fire accordingly. It seems like these days, it's a day on, day off in terms of when they're firing.
It's just so many miracles.
Yeah, absolutely.
Miracles. Israel is able to shoot these things, most of them out of the sky. Of course, several weeks ago I was in the airport when one got through, hit right outside the airport. But Israel's still pretty good at intercepting these ballistic missiles. But when they get exploded, detonated in the air, there's still large shrapnel that flies everywhere, and people have to get out of the way. It's a very dangerous situation, and yet we don't really see even incidents where the shrapnel is injuring people. It's completely miraculous. Just last night, there were reports that police sappers were looking for large shrapnel in the Jerusalem area. They have to kind of track. It's very difficult. They have to track where this thing is exploded and then where shrapnel could go. I mean, it could fall over a very large area, which is why the sirens go off, all across the country. It's not like the Qassam rockets from Gaza where the Iron Dome system knows where a rocket is going to land, and it puts these warning sirens just in that area.
And that's why you have to stay in the shelter for 10 minutes, because you never know when a piece of shrapnel, even if the rocket or missiles intercepted outside of Israel's airspace, pieces of shrapnel can still fall in the country. One landed in Gush Etzion on Lag BaOmer. As people were outside having their bonfires, you see this huge piece of shrapnel right next to the bonfire there. So it's definitely dangerous.
Very dangerous, yeah. And it's hard for Israel to know. Right, the amount of intelligence that Israel has regarding the Houthis is not the same amount as intelligence as they had in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iran. And that's because prior to this war, Israel really never perceived the Houthis as a direct threat to Israel, which means that Israel does not have assets, inside Yemen that are working to provide information to the Mossad. And as such, it's very difficult to take out this missile capabilities. So what Israel's doing is, in retaliation, they do the big strikes. They hit the things that they know. They know the airport. They hit the air. There's no more airport in Sana'a. There's no more airplanes. There's no more planes. Okay, nobody can get in and out of Yemen now by plane. People are stranded in the country. The port infrastructure. The major industry. Israel can hit those things because they know where it is, and so they can do these major demonstrations of force. But ultimately, that's not necessarily going to stop the Houthis from being able to fire ballistic missiles, which may be spread out. In some cases, you could have one or two or just a handful in a certain place, and there might be a hidden launcher, and Israel doesn't know where they are. And it's hard with the ballistic missiles to pinpoint exactly where they're being fired from because the distances are so great between Yemen and Israel. And so the Israeli belief is that the only way that you're going to actually see the stopping of firing by missiles from the Houthis against Israel is when the war in Gaza comes to an end. And that is why it is also so important to get the war in Gaza to the fastest possible conclusion. The war is now coming on almost 2 years. We're over 600 days. Everybody wants a 6-day war. We're in a 600-day war. But Israel needs it over. Trump needs it over. We have to, I hope that the leadership of Israel understands that time is no longer on Israel's side with this, because the longer this goes on, the longer the false narratives get perpetrated.
At the same time, you still have countries out there who want to reward Hamas for their October 7th massacre by continuously calling for the establishment of a Palestinian state, France being one of those countries. You had over the weekend, U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, denouncing France's push for Palestinian statehood, telling Fox News that Paris should instead carve out, quote, carve out a piece of the French Riviera for the so-called Palestinians. Let's check out that video.
October 7th changed a lot of things. If France is really so determined to see a Palestinian state, I've got a suggestion for them. Carve out a piece of the French Riviera and create a Palestinian state. They're welcome to do that, but they're not welcome to impose that kind of pressure on a sovereign nation.
So here you have a creative proposal, kind of tongue-in-cheek, by Ambassador Mike Huckabee, telling the French leadership there, you want a Palestinian state so bad, why don't you give them a little piece of the French Riviera next to Cannes or one of those cities down there on the coast. Let them establish their state there. Huckabee essentially condemning these countries for wanting to reward Hamas for carrying out a massacre instead of pressuring Hamas and the terrorist organizations to stop firing, to stop attacking Israel. So this is tongue-in-cheek, but I think very, very effective and poignant point there by Ambassador Mike Huckabee.
Carving out a piece of the French Riviera for a Palestinian state, that might be a more extreme solution. But, France and the rest of Europe, which basically took in, millions of Muslims during the Syrian civil war, when Muslims are killing Muslims, Europe says, just come over here. Life will be better for you over here, right? When Jews are involved, after the worst massacre in Israeli history, Israel launches a war to root out the terrorist organization that committed the massacre and to get its hostages back. And France and none of the other European countries have been willing to take in not even one Gazan, like not a single one, not one, right? So meanwhile, they're calling for the creation of a Palestinian state to reward the terror attack. They want Israel to carve out, a chunk of land. Israel carved out a chunk of land. It was called Gaza, okay? And if anybody wants to know what the Palestinian state would look like, well, look at Gaza. That's it. That's what happens. It becomes a terror haven, and then it's mired in war. That's it. So meanwhile, Macron pushing this Palestinian state narrative, with full force right now, really since Israel announced its renewed military operations inside Gaza. Macron is just nonstop right now. He's just saying Palestinian state, Palestinian state. He's doing that because the Biden administration is not there to be leading the charge. So Macron thinks that he's leading Europe, but ultimately France is going to get cursed for this. I mean, it's what they're doing to Israel is so much damage on the diplomatic level. But let's see them open up their borders and start taking in Gazans. Let's see how much they really care about the Palestinian people.
Speaking of a so-called state and the Palestinian Authority, we'll finish with this today. This past weekend, there was supposed to be a high-level Saudi-led delegation headed to Ramallah to meet with Mahmoud Abbas. A visit to the PA by the Saudis, Emiratis, Qataris, Egyptians, Jordanians, and Turkish. Their foreign ministers were supposed to come, and Israel blocked the visit, not allowing them to come into Judea and Samaria to meet in Ramallah. saying that the PA, one Israeli official saying the PA, which to this day refuses to condemn the October 7th massacre, intended to host in Ramallah a provocative meeting of foreign ministers to discuss, again, the establishment of a so-called Palestinian state. So that meeting did not happen. And let's talk about the ramifications for that blocked meeting.
Well, we also saw reports that the French, together with the Saudis, so it's not a coincidence that these two things come together, were planning on holding some kind of a conference at the United Nations where France would recognize the creation of a Palestinian state. And according to some of the reports, it says that Riyadh was pushing other countries to recognize Palestinian statehood as well. And the Saudis, they're playing a double game. Whenever I've spoken to senior level Israeli officials, they always say that the Saudis are telling them that they don't care about the Palestinians, that they are encouraging Israel to do whatever they need to do to take care of the situation, that they believe that the Palestinians have blocked a lot of progress in this region. They have sucked billions of dollars from countries, from Arab countries, as well as from Western countries, and have just perpetrated violence and impeded progress. And yet, on the other hand, you see that some Saudi officials, including the Saudi foreign minister, continues to talk about Israel in negative light, talks about potentially pushing other countries to recognize Palestinian statehood. They've got to get off the fence. On the one hand, they're talking about normalizing with Israel, and I understand during the war, you're not going to have normalization. We need everything to calm down. The whole region is inflamed. You have to first defeat the terrorists before you can normalize with the moderates. Obviously, the Saudis were part of the blessing that was given to the Emiratis and the Bahrainis for normalizing relations with Israel in the Abraham Accords, and it's believed that the Saudis will be next, and it's believed that others can be next too, including the Qataris, including Syria, including Lebanon. Many countries could normalize with Israel once the war gets done, but meanwhile, the Saudis have to stop straddling the fence. Just keep your mouth shut. You don't have to say for this way or for that, but to play this double game where on the one hand you're saying, we're going to normalize with Israel. On the other hand, you're saying we need the creation of a Palestinian state. I mean, these two messages are inconsistent.
Absolutely. And on that note, we are out of time in this week's edition of Jerusalem Minute. I want to thank the production team behind the scenes here, Zach Sickerman, Ryan Lifshitz, Yuri Svretsky, and Esther Eden. Make sure you join us next week on Jerusalem Minute and check out all the amazing content on JNS TV and go to jns.org for all the latest news from Israel, the Middle East, and the entire Jewish world. Let's hope for a quiet week, Alex. I don't know. I mean, that's a lot to ask, I guess.
I don't think that these are going to be quiet weeks.
No, I know.
We got to finish what we started here, and it might be hard these next several weeks, but ultimately, by acting with force and doing what we need to do, hopefully, this period of war will be followed by decades of peace.
Amen to that, and continue to pray for the well-being of our brave IDF men and women protecting us 24/7. Have a great week, everybody. We'll see you next week on Jerusalem Minute.